Welcome back, everyone. You've probably seen the headlines about the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And today we're really going to dive deep into it. Specifically, the M23 rebel group's takeover of Goma.
Yep.
We've got articles here from all sorts of sources: South China Morning Post, ABC News, Open, the New York Times.
Okay.
You get the idea.
All
Our
right.
mission is to figure out, okay, what's actually going on beneath those headlines? Why should anybody care?
Yeah.
And what could happen next?
It is a complicated situation, that's for sure. Lots going on, but that's what makes a deep dive like this so useful, hopefully.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that just jumps out is how fast the M23 took Goma. We're talking about a city of 2 million people. How did they pull that off? And, like, why is Goma so important anyway?
Well, Goma's important for a whole bunch of reasons, really. It's a huge center for trade in the whole region.
Right.
It's a hub for humanitarian aid.
Okay.
And then you've got the mineral resources.
Ah, right. Always the resources.
Yeah.
What's there that everybody wants?
Well, a lot of things, but the big one is coltan. And coltan, that's what they use to make those microchips in everything, phones, laptops, you name it.
Wow, so this isn't just some local conflict.
Nope.
The M23 taking Goma could, like, actually mess with the global tech industry.
Exactly. It affects all of us, potentially, our devices even.
Yeah.
And we can't forget, this wasn't a peaceful takeover. It was brutal.
Yeah, I was going to say.
NSA had some really disturbing numbers.
Okay.
Over 100 deaths, nearly 1,000 injured. Hospitals are completely overwhelmed.
Oh, man.
And then you read the individual stories.
Oh.
Open, for example, had this account of an Italian man, Marco Rigoldi. He had to flee to Kigali in Rwanda with his pregnant wife.
Yeah.
Just to escape the violence.
It's heartbreaking to think about all the people caught in the middle of this. It just makes you wonder, all this talk about Rwanda's role in this. I mean, the speed of that takeover makes you think, well, maybe this M23 had some outside help.
Yeah, there's a lot of suspicion there. And to really understand it, you got to go back to the Rwandan genocide in 1994.
Huh.
That was horrific. The Hutu majority just targeted the Tutsi minority. I mean, we're talking mass killings, people forced from their homes. A lot of those Tutsis ended up fleeing to Congo.
Right.
And over time, some of them formed armed groups, like the M23.
So the M23 are mostly Tutsis.
Primarily, yeah.
So Rwanda, which is now led by a Tutsi government, is being accused of basically backing the M23.
Yeah, that's the accusation, yes.
Yeah.
The UN has these reports, Open mentioned them, saying something like 4,000 Rwandan soldiers are fighting alongside the M23.
Right.
And they've got really good equipment. So that's where the outside help idea comes in. But, of course, Rwanda's denying everything.
Right.
Saying it's Congo's fault for not keeping those old peace agreements.
Oh, so there were already agreements in place.
Yeah. ABC News had a piece on that.
So we've got Rwanda denying any involvement despite, all these reports. How do we even begin to sort this out? It's like a giant puzzle.
It really is. And that's why understanding the context of those peace agreements is so important. That they go back a ways.
Yeah.
Things like the Lusaka ceasefire agreement. The thing is, a lot of them haven't worked out. Tensions never really went away.
Yes.
So that's what gives a group like the M23 an opening.
And it's happening under this cloud of international condemnation.
Yeah.
The UN speaking out. The U.S. is making it very clear they're not happy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio even spoke to the Congolese president. And the EU's been pretty critical, too.
Yeah. The international response has been loud and clear on this.
Yeah.
Some are even calling for sanctions against Rwanda.
Sanctions, okay, that's serious. But I guess that has its own downsides, too, right?
Oh, for sure. It's a really complicated tool. I mean, you want to pressure a government to change its behavior, but you don't want to make things worse for the people who need help, right?
Right.
Like blocking humanitarian aid or making diplomacy even harder. You got to be careful.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
You want to condemn the violence and hold whoever is responsible accountable, but you also want to leave room for some kind of peaceful solution down the road.
Exactly.
And all of this is playing out on the world stage, but then you've got what's happening on the ground. People are protesting in Kinshasa, and they're not just protesting, they're targeting embassies.
Yeah.
Rwandan embassy, obviously, but also France, Belgium, Kenya, even Uganda.
People are angry, and they want their leaders to do something. Il Post had this incredible picture of protesters like burning tires and throwing rocks at the embassies.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
a powerful image.
Yeah, this conflict, it goes way beyond just, diplomatic stuff. It's affecting everyone.
Yeah, and we haven't even touched on the humanitarian crisis yet. I mean, things are really getting desperate.
No.
ABC News was painting this just awful picture. Hundreds of thousands of people running from the fighting, roads blocked, the airports basically shut down for evacuations, no power, no water in a lot of places. I mean, just awful.
It's just horrific. Like the UN humanitarian coordinator, Bruno Marquis, said, this is a whole new level of violence and suffering.
Right.
And this is in a region that already has like one of the biggest humanitarian crises anywhere in the world. We're
Yeah.
talking almost 6.5 million people displaced, and now this.
And then on top of all that, NSA reported that the World Food Program had to stop giving out food aid in Goma.
Yeah.
And Goma was already having food shortages before this whole thing even started.
Right.
And then there was that report from ABC News about the Charité Maternelle Hospital. They said it got hit by shells, civilians were killed, newborns, pregnant women. I mean, a hospital. It's hard to even imagine what it's like for people there.
The situation is it's just deteriorating so fast. And that food aid being suspended, that's a huge red flag. We need a solution, and we need it now.
Yeah.
But that's easier said than done, especially for the international community. What are they supposed to do?
Right. It's one thing to condemn the violence, but it's a whole other thing to figure out what to actually do about it. I saw that the New York Times was reporting that the U.S. Embassy is telling all American citizens to get out of Congo right away, evacuate immediately. Things seem like they could really spiral out of control. I mean, if this isn't contained, what could happen? What are the long-term consequences?
Well, if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, you can see the possibility of the whole region becoming destabilized.
Oh, wow.
Neighboring countries, they're already feeling the pressure. You've got refugees pouring across the borders, and there's always a chance the violence will spread. And there's this one really worrying thing that Open brought up, the Ebola research lab in Goma. It was damaged in the fighting. If we have another Ebola outbreak on top of all this, it would be a disaster.
So we're talking about a humanitarian catastrophe that could easily get even worse, spread to other countries, cause even more suffering.
Yes.
What can be done? I mean, is military intervention an option?
It's definitely being discussed, but it's so tricky. There's no guarantee it would work. And when you look at past interventions in this region,
Right.
the UN peacekeeping missions in the 90s and early 2000s, for instance, the results were, well, mixed at best. Some people are arguing for a stronger peacekeeping force, more international troops, a mandate to really protect civilians.
Oh, okay. When we talk about peacekeeping, what does that even mean? What would that look like?
Well, there are different kinds. You have observer missions.
Okay.
So that's where UN troops are mostly there to watch what's happening and report on any violations of ceasefire agreements.
Gotcha.
And then you have actual intervention forces. They can get more involved.
Right.
They're allowed to use force, to protect civilians, try to stop the fighting from escalating.
It sounds like there's a whole range of options, and each one comes with its own risks and potential benefits.
Exactly. And figuring out the best way to go about it, that means taking into account the specifics of what's happening on the ground, the capabilities of the forces involved, and most importantly, the impact it could have on the people who are caught in the middle of all this.
So many factors. And at the end of the day, no matter what the international community does, it seems like a real solution has to deal with the underlying causes of the conflict.
Yeah.
We're talking about these deep-seated ethnic tensions that go back centuries, and then you've got the fight over Congo's resources. It's just this cycle of violence that's been going on for decades. Can it ever really be broken?
I think there's always hope. But to make a difference, it's going to take a lot of different actions. All sides involved have to genuinely commit to peace talks. There has to be accountability for the horrible things that have happened. And we need to address the economic inequalities that are fueling this whole conflict. But most importantly, we need to understand how we got here.
So we have to understand the past if we want to build a better future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something that everyone can be a part of. It's not just for governments and international organizations to figure out.
That's a good point. It makes it seem a little less overwhelming. Like maybe we can actually do something, but what can we do? I mean, this is happening so far away. Does it even matter if we pay attention?
Awareness is huge. It's the first step. When we understand what's really going on in this conflict, we can push our own governments to make smarter decisions. We can demand that they do something.
It's easy to hear about these conflicts and they feel very abstract.
Yeah.
But we have to remember there are real people whose lives are just being shattered by this. Open had that story about Marco Rigoldi, that Italian man who had to run from Goma with his pregnant wife. Can you imagine?
It's just the fear, the uncertainty. They've had to leave everything behind. It's traumatic. And that's happening to so many families right now.
It really puts things into perspective. Behind all the politics and the strategy and all that, there are people just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And it's not just the people fleeing, right?
Uh,
The doctors and nurses in those hospitals that are overflowing with patients. The aid workers trying to get to people who need help. The journalists trying to report on what's going on.
it takes incredible courage to do what they're doing.
It really does. And then you think about the Congolese people themselves. I
Yeah.
mean, they've been through decades of this conflict, displacement, hardship, but they're still fighting for peace, still trying to build a better future.
Amazing, their resilience.
It really
Yeah.
is. So, where does this leave us? We've talked about the history, the geopolitics, the humanitarian disaster, the human toll of this conflict. What's the takeaway?
I think it shows us that what happens in Congo, it doesn't stay in Congo.
Yeah.
It affects the whole region. It affects global trade.
Mm-hmm.
It affects really our collective conscience. We're all connected in ways that we may not even realize. And this conflict, it has ripple effects. They reach way beyond Congo's borders.
It's a wake up call. We can't ignore this. We can't be indifferent to it, even though it feels far away. But what can we do? It feels so big.
Well, we can support the humanitarian organizations that are working on the ground in Congo. They're providing essential help, for people who've been displaced, people who've lost everything, people who are just trying to make it through the day. Even a small donation, it can make a difference.
And aside from donating money,
We need to challenge those oversimplified stories that we hear about these kinds of conflicts. Take the time to really learn about it, the history, the complexities, the different points of view.
yeah,
It's important. And we can contact our representatives, tell them what we've learned, and urge them to support policies that will help bring peace and stability to the region. Make our voices heard.
so staying informed, speaking up, supporting those who are working for peace, and challenging those easy answers that we sometimes hear. It sounds like even when something feels really far away, we can actually have an impact. This has been a heavy conversation, but really important. As we wrap up this deep dive into the conflict in Congo, I hope you'll keep learning, keep engaging, and keep seeking out different perspectives. This conflict, it isn't over. And if we want to build a more peaceful, more just future for Congo and for the whole world, then understanding this, understanding how complicated it is absolutely essential. Thanks for joining us.